Hi. So, I've been working on some essays about Dragon Age, hoping to center discussions which seem to go by the wayside. For this project, I wanted to really talk about why Dragon Age is so special to me, personally. Why do I give a shit about Dragon Age? I mean, I went to see Dawn of the Seeker in theaters, for fuck's sake.
What do you think it is about the Dragon Age video game? What do you think it would be about that video game that would make such a great feature film?
I would say it
was in some shady part of town and only seated like 30 people. What compels somebody to do something like that? Anyway, while working on this project, I had a tricky subject come up as I neared completion on some of the essays. I had gotten into some pretty deep things which began looking like they necessitated certain content warnings. That's a little strange, isn't it? To have a content warning for an essay on a rated T for teen video game? So I decided to scream into the void for a bit, writing to myself where I wouldn't expect anybody to see. But I want to share with you now what I wrote. I think it's a great introduction for what I want out of this project. So, without further ado, with this content warning, I had to answer a difficult question. Say you're writing a story in the Dragon Age universe where humans have enslaved and marginalized elves. In this story, where racism is deconstructed and analyzed through the fantasy race of elves, is it fair to have a content warning for racism? Or would that seem perverse? Would it risk conflating the two? The racism in Dragon Age isn't the same as real-world racism, not in the exact same ways we can observe it in our world, which is what the word is meant to point to. Praxis devised as an answer to a racist power structure in Dragon Age can never be translated to our real world. It is, alternatively, a deconstruction of the concept of racist power structures, a dissection of it wherein we get to observe its shape and effects endemic to it, conceptually. However, the very fact that it is doing these things does, in some way, harken back to our real world. We analyze a deconstruction of racism through our own lens, which has been molded by the real world. How we understand racism informs how we analyze a critique of it. And so, this content warning isn't to suggest that Dragon Age's depiction is actual racism in a real-world sense, but instead to signify to the listener that there will be thematic content which might resonate strongly with their understanding of racism. Now, this is still a heavy thing to entrust to an author, and I take seriously the caution that you may have of placing that trust in me. I can only say that if you do put that trust in me by continuing forward, I will honor it by treating these themes with sensitivity and maturity. And that's all there is to say. But why do I feel this scares me? I get this across? What do I even want to get across here? I want to get across my intended effect, and the amount of responsibility I'm willing to accept for that effect, which is, very unfortunately, 0. It seems as though I'm announcing that I'm somehow not stepping into an important space by attempting to deconstruct racist power structures, but that's not true. There is a responsibility here, and I want to convey that I'm taking that seriously, but what if I mishandle it? I rewrote and reread this passage dozens of times. I imagine reading this as a progressive type, seeing somebody make a deeply impassioned plea to not take them too seriously, despite them stepping into serious territory, mucking about haphazardly in a very important space. I imagine reading this as a conservative type, seeing somebody spinelessly trying to assuage my fear that this isn't woke, actually, because elves are real, actually. Why am I writing this at all? Isn't this a little too self-serious? If anything, I hope this gets across that I do recognize what I'm doing is, at least in some way, serious, and that I do recognize a certain responsibility does come with it, though I don't know what that responsibility is, or how to get myself to fully engage with it. I will not be revealing truths about racism that are perfectly transliterable to our real world. Nobody will have a eureka moment listening to this and think, aha, this will help. However, I am going some way to explain what racism is, conceptually. Why is it here? What does it do? I assert that racism is indeed not an intrinsic part of human nature, and in doing so, I also charge that a human nature doesn't exist at all. I assert that racism is a construct meant to affirm state power through a violently enforced hierarchy. This power, you'll note, is only affirmed through the conveyance of racism. Thus, racism itself is not what gives the state its power. This power could have been affirmed through any other arbitrarily decided means, and that's critical to note. As discussed in the text, Orlais subjugated and enslaved Ferelden, though now looks upon her as a political ally. No such construction like that of racism was made to keep Ferelden in chains. Orlais never stated their intent to enslave all of humanity, despite Ferelden herself being dominated by humans. Orlais had, however, decided to place elves beneath humans in their hierarchical structure because they wanted to expand into Dalish territory and benefit from Dalish labor. So here we have a question. Why only the elves? Is it because elves are different to human and it's just in our nature to hate what's different? Well, there was no elven leadership in Orlais prior to them codifying a difference in the righteousness of elven and human leadership. Hence, no reason to exalt humans over elves beyond the wild imaginings of those in power who just so happen to be humans. So, if Orlais instituted racist policy because races are different, why only codify that after border tensions are stoked during a planned expansion of Orlesian territory? And also, why did only Orlais engage with the exalted March of the Dales and not the rest of the human-dominated states who also followed the religious power which called for it? The Dalish were targeted for the power that targeting them would accrue Orlais, not because they were elves. But then, why elect to ally with Ferelden, who were previously enslaved and not the Dalish? Is it because Ferelden is also run by humans, meaning it's just in our nature to hate those who are different and ally with those who are similar? Well, not really. Again, If it is observable that we do hate people who are different, how those differences impact society is still delineated arbitrarily. Why is this difference more important than this difference? Because the powerful say so, and that's the only reason those differences get honored. Ferelden subscribes to the beliefs of the Chantry, itself an institution of Orlesian power. Ferelden, unlike the Dalish who observe their own religion, show themselves to be amenable to Orlesian influence by way of the Chantry, meaning they offer less threat as a political ally than the Dalish, the notoriously isolationist foreign power that defends its borders. So the question is then, how exactly did Ferelden break from Orlais and earn its right to independence in the eyes of Orlais? Ferelden fought a years-long bloody war against its occupiers, culminating in one final showdown that saw Merrick Theron slay Megrin in a one-on-one duel. This duel marked the definitive end to Orlesian oppression. So, through this, was Orlais convinced that their subjugation of Ferelden was unjust, and as such would never seek to subjugate anybody else again? Well, no. They were simply convinced that Ferelden was too mighty to abuse. Time and time again in history, might has made right. Orlais still remains right to subjugate anybody she wishes in the eyes of the world powers, and that right can only be contested or disproved by might. Here, it is made apparent that the power to enslave elves remains unchallenged by political actors such as Briala in Inquisition. Possibly unchallenged, I'm not fully familiar with her plans and actions. When Briala says she wants to instate elves as actors in Orlesian power, neither that power's ability to enslave others, nor its righteousness in doing so, is meaningfully threatened. The only addition is that Orlais's power is now protected by an elf acting in service to it from the top, as opposed to from the bottom. An elf at the top of the system can't undo the fact that the system itself is built with the structural support of primarily other elves remaining on the bottom, intrinsic to its design. So, the very right to subjugate is the thing to challenge. This still has to be done with the understanding of how that right was obscured, however. Systemic racism must be revealed and unraveled first, though allowing an elf to explore the machine of power from the top is not a definitive means to that endpoint, precisely because the state doesn't inherently care about race any more than it needs to in order to put any body in the lower class, or pacify dissent against the ruling class's power. Jesus Christ, have I ever heard of a period? As example, we can look to the Qunari. They have no race in the conventional identitarian sense, and as such, have no form of institutionalized racism. However, internal biases might still affect Qunari judgment of Videothari, members of other races who serve the Qun. They may tend to merit Videothari martial prowess lesser than those of the Horned Qunari, for example. Thus, race remains a factor to be considered thoughtfully, but is, crucially, not codified into the very structure of Qunari state power, like the disenfranchisement of elves is across the rest of Thedas. Despite this, the Qunari still seek to enslave and forcefully subjugate all under their control. Were Briella to achieve her goal of Elvhen actors at the top, somebody would still have to be at the bottom without greater change to the system. The answer as to who is placed in that position would be decided arbitrarily. And remember, a decision was already made, so political movement would have to be spent undoing the fact that elves were put in that place. But nonetheless, that answer remains necessary in Orlais, even under Elven leadership. To have any amount of power over anybody else is to accept the responsibility to wield that power exclusively to the benefit of those who have entrusted you with it in the first place. This is what power looks like when behaving healthily. When literally any amount of that power is wielded against anybody that provides it, i.e. subjugating and exploiting people's labor, or even if simply the yields of that power do not benefit those who provide it, i.e. using taxes to empower protected classes over disenfranchised classes, this is a betrayal. This means that, when behaving healthily, a state can't reasonably imprison anybody against their will. This is observed outside of race in the Chantry's Circle of Magi. To imprison mages, to make them subjects of your institution, is to fully accept that all of the power accrued by dominating their autonomy must be wielded exclusively to their benefit, thus making the prisoners the one in control of where their autonomy gets directed, which would return them their full autonomy, controverting that the initial imprisonment should be made to begin with. So, the forceful imprisonment of mages is unavoidably, intrinsically, an abuse of power. This framing makes the fight against these abuses of power necessary for a truly functioning system of governance, but more importantly, it shows us that it is possible to truly target and fight against these evils. We can abolish these abuses of powers, excise them completely from this world, because they are contrivances made over top of the world, and decidedly not in observance with some natural order which would somehow facilitate the formation of these abuses, whether or not there was a state power responsible for them. The fight is necessary and critically possible. To quote Ta-Nehisi Coates, "We have to guard against the temptation to accept that history is necessarily the limit of who we are." That quote is what made me want to release this essay. If all we have is the tides of time to heal our wounds, then we need to begin by planting seeds for the next generations. Nothing starts tomorrow. It starts right now, or it hasn't started at all, which is to say that we can't simply expect the next generation to solve our problems, because we were inheritors of them ourselves. For as long as the shape is still clear to us, and the light is still shining on these evils, we need to fucking pounce. This is still about Dragon Age, right? So here, finally, at the end of an exhausting examination of racism and how it relates to the state power found in a rated T for teen video game, we get to the crux of why I'm so conflicted. Why am I so comfortable tasking myself with this revelation, making it clear to the viewer that racism acts in this way? Am I even right? Is any of this valuable? Am I mishandling this subject matter? Certain aspects of this, upon rereading, come across poorly. Through an attempt at hyperfixating on abuse of power as my target evil, I was left with an examination of those abuses which feels a little too obtuse, incomplete. I wanted to be objective and to avoid complicating real-world discussions on these topics by somehow differentiating my message from those found in the real world. I now fear that it may be limiting the critique itself to so finely narrow the perspective by dissevering my every connection to it. I am lost. I feel like I need guidance. Well, as all do eventually in their quest for enlightenment, I guess it's time to go to the modern-day Tower of Babel. Okay, Quora, you've always proven to be a ceaseless font of sage wisdom. What do you have for me today? Are you too much of a coward to allow someone to answer you publicly? What? Goodbye, Jim Bunch. I have already What? Okay, this one looks like they're just beefing with somebody else. Are you seriously suggesting that I or anyone else am obligated to not just listen to you, but what? Question, are you too much of a coward to allow someone to answer you publicly? Not at all. What? People are just answering this question? No, I'm just done putting up with narcissistic abuse when I know I didn't deserve it. I don't understand this website. Wow, so I guess I truly am lost. If Quora can't help me, so then, what do I do? Why am I doing this? The only answer I've come to is one that I personally find chilling. I don't know. I just really have to. I'm sorry. It's simply too disquieting. I just can't escape that this world, the real world we're talking of now, is a world where marginalized folk live under constant, deafening threat, where our very personhood is trivialized and then assaulted on all sides. They do this literally by ransacking our institutions and burning our research, setting us back decades, and they do it in small, cruel ways too, by refusing to engage with us as full, equal people. They insult us. Whenever they can, they just twist the knife. And that might seem like a frivolous complaint from an outsider perspective, but make no mistake, it isn't. They can only twist the knife because they know that a knife was stabbed into us in the first place. When they do it, it hurts. And they do it to remind us that there is a knife inside of us, to remind us that nobody is coming to pull it out. And I just want it out. I just want to know that it can be pulled out. That it's okay for it to be pulled out. I am so tired, exhausted at keeping strong in the face of somebody who hates me twisting that knife. I'm running out of that strength. But Dragon Age, a world in which I've invested myself for my entire adult life, which helped brace me throughout so many major moments of my own journey, shows me that a world can be healed. Dragon Age reveals to me the scars of my own world, not just to say that evil exists and will always exist in this nebulous battle of good versus evil, but to shine a light on where that evil hides, because it does hide. Every bit as craven and vulnerable as it makes us out to be, it hides. When it's strong, it will stab you. But when it's weak, when it knows it's losing, when it starts losing hope, is when it twists the knife instead.
Do you hear what I'm hearing?